very much, Nia. Andrew, Liz, Leo, can you hear me at the back? Okay, fantastic, excellent. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. My name's Paul Fisher. I am an international disputes barrister that lives and works in Westminster. I used to live in Covent Garden, and so the West End was very much in my backyard. I spent a lot of time in Soho, Fitzrovia, Mayfair and Marylebone. But what intrigues me about running here as a councillor is far more than geographical connection to the area. I would relish the opportunity to be an advocate for local residents because they need one. One thing I love about the West End is that it's representative of so much of what I love about our capital city. And that's its diversity, its dynamism, its history, its heritage, its communities. And that's absolutely essential. The residential communities in the 4 villages that make up this ward are what keeps it going. They're the reason why it's attractive to people to keep coming back. But I'm afraid all of that is currently at risk. It's at risk in Soho, where weak planning and licensing decisions are forcing people to leave. It's at risk in Mayfair, where at the beginning of this year, there was a genuine uncertainty about the council's commitment to library provision. We can have a grown-up debate about that later on. I'm happy to talk about that. It's at risk in Fitzrovia, where a simple issue like removing big black bins means you have rubbish piling up on the streets, on Great Titchfield Street and Foley Street, to name just a few. It's at risk in Marylebone, where without any consultation with anyone, on the doorstep of Mayfair and Marylebone, we have the infamous Marble Arch Mound, a collection of scaffolding and foliage that's just as unstable as Donald Trump's hairdo, for which you and me were charged £6 million, and still no explanation as to how on earth that project got off the ground. So there are some real issues here, and I should stress that there are lots of people here today who will be fed up with party politics at a national level and at a local level, and I understand that and I hear that. But, and it is an important but, any political party that's in power for too long becomes complacent. And that's especially so when you're the Conservative Party in Westminster and you've been in power since 1964. Complacency breeds incompetence and it breeds wrong decision making. What I think is a great solution here in the West End, and has been since 2018, is having a Labour challenge, a real Labour challenge, to the Westminster Conservative Council. It makes them sit up, it makes them listen to residents, and that's why I would implore you, as much as you can, to vote for Labour on the 5th of May. What is absolutely essential is that residents are placed at the heart of decision making across the West End, and I'm looking forward to discussing with you tonight about how we collectively make that happen. Thank you.
Julie Redmond for the Conservative Party.
Good evening. The last time I was in St Anne's was for the Soho Society AGM last September 2021. And I looked around the room and I saw people that had passion, had energy for this vibrant community. And I realised I was home. So I'm actually not going to spend too much time talking about myself and the issues that have already been raised, because this is all about you. I want to talk about Margaret, a little Irish lady who I met in Clarion Court, who was looking after her dying friend from Greenacre Court. I want to look at Mary, who, another little Irish lady who lives in DeFore's place, and she can't leave her house. I'm a nurse. I know how hard this must be for her. I want to talk about Barry Miles, who lives on Hanson Street. He's a great guy. He showed me the old Fitzrovia, where the greengrocers used to be, the butcher shop used to be. I want to talk about the headmistresses in Soho Parish and in All Souls and St George's School, Denise, who tends to all the plants and trees voluntarily around Holcroft, Mark Gazala, who's planted 1,000 trees. This is the West End community. I want to talk about the pub owner who lives on Brewer Street and his family who've lived there for a long, long time. I want to talk about Soho Dairy, if you're here tonight. I want to talk about Jane Doyle, who has a better social life than I do. I want to talk about Michael Bolt from the Marylebone Association. I also sit on the committee. Good friend. Tim Lord, Yorman Blumen, who have been a voice for residents for so long. For the mothers and fathers who bring their children up in the West End community, I know what it's like. I'm a mother. I know the pros and cons. What are we but residents who live in an area we call our home? I have lived in Marylebone for 17 years. It's my home. This is our home. Residents matter. Our homes matter. I want a community where residents' values are heard and listened to. What I want for my family is what I want for you. Thank you.
Jessica Toll for the Labour Party.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Toll. I suspect, like many of you, I decided to move to the West End because I was attracted by, as Paul said, the dynamism, the diversity, the heritage, the culture, which over centuries has attracted makers, musicians, artists, and creatives. Being here during the pandemic really hit home for me just how special the community is here. I'm honoured to have become one of them. And every day I'm inspired by many of you in the room who have made this community what it is today. I want to be one of your local councillors for a number of reasons. There are lots of issues that we're going to talk about today, which are problems, which we hear about a lot on the doorstep, and which are being exacerbated by coming out of the pandemic. But at the heart of my approach is about preserving and protecting the really special and unique character of the community here. Now, what does that mean in practice? That means ensuring that residents' voices are afforded the weight they deserve in the planning process here. It means ensuring our heritage buildings are protected. It means ensuring that our local amenities, from libraries and leisure centres to schools and nurseries and places like Berwick Street Market, are protected. It also means that local residents feel safe, included, and respected in the community. Now, I'm already working to do this on many fronts. I write for 2 local publications about local issues, the My Soho Times and the Covent Gardener, in response to concerns that women have raised with me about their safety at night. I've raised the issues with police to ensure that they're in their information reports, and I've organised for urban planners and lighting experts to come out, meet local residents and hear about the issues. I'm also working with local residents and representatives of the creative industries to make sure that they are working together to build a vision of what the future of this city can be like. With me to this campaign, I bring years of campaigning experience internationally, nationally, and here locally now. I bring enthusiasm for issues that I've worked on internationally, like early childhood development, women's rights, conflict resolution. I've also worked intently on community consultations, and I know they can't be done easily. They take time to make sure you get the most out of them. And finally, I want to be your local councillor. I want to build on the good work that Pancho's done. I want to make sure that Soho, the West End, isn't just a great place to visit, but it's a great place to live for all of you. Thank you.
Owen Murphy for the Conservatives.
Hello everyone, I'm Owen Murphy, also Irish, raised from a big Irish family in Notting Hill, just off Lavergrove. I've lived in W1 for 17 years, and for 10 of them in my current flat, which is on Great Portland Street, in the current West End ward. I love the area. I've been involved in various of the mini societies and various activities. I even conducted a wedding for an orchestra, a wedding of a friend who lives in the ward and who's sitting in this audience tonight. But most importantly, in terms of getting involved in the community, I've been a councillor for 4 years. Currently, I represent a ward which is on the west side of Marylebone, a little bit of which is coming into West End Ward. But at the same time, I was working in a relatively big city job as an asset manager. I've given up full-time work in order to focus on the council work, and I found that absolutely essential in this ward. It's so demanding. I really enjoyed it, but there's 4 different villages, different groups involved, different people, different issues and sensitivities in different areas. And just getting to understand that, speak to people and so on, has been very engaging, enjoyable, and I hope I can represent you and continue the work I've done on the council so far. I'm a backbencher, so I'm on 5 committees. So I share one of them. One of them is involved in granting business rate relief to small businesses who are struggling. We interview them, or they send some documents, and we consider their application. I'm on 2 scrutiny committees where I challenge the cabinet members and I challenge the officers of the council, the employees, senior officers of the council, about what they're doing in various different areas. So I'm on 2 of those. And I'm also on a planning committee. So I've got to know the planning, some of the issues of planning from both sides, obviously from speaking to residents and as a resident myself, understanding some of those problems, but also seeing how the process works. So really, I feel I can assist represent the area well for 5 main reasons, really. Firstly, as a resident, first-hand understanding some of the issues actually living in Fitzrovia, where there's a lot of things that have happened in Soho are sort of spilling over to Fitzrovia, some of the issues that we'll all be aware about. Because of my knowledge of planning already, having an inside track, I've spoken on behalf of residents at planning applications, some very big ones, the Arcadia redevelopment on the Marylebone Road, for instance. I spoke at that and represented the residents and got very involved with them in presenting. But with my understanding of how the planning works, that gives me an inside track on that. Thirdly, just experience of scrutiny. I've been on scrutiny because I've learned to challenge cabinet members and officers. I have an inside tack on that. And fourthly, as a member of the majority group, as a Conservative, it gives me an inside access to cabinet members, which a minority person wouldn't have. So it gives me a sort of a familiarity with the people involved and a certain ear that others wouldn't have. I suppose most importantly, perhaps, certainly very importantly, I'm single and I have the time to do it. Nobody has enough time, but I have. How much time I've got left to speak on. So really, I think Conservative administration is the best one to achieve some of the ends that we need here. There are lots of issues. We need to conserve our heritage, the great architectural heritage that we have. We need to pick up some of the issues that Tim said about the change in noise patterns. We need to defend the health of residents whilst encouraging a thriving economy again. We need to defend residents against noise, noise, nuisance, and air pollution. We need to. We all know what the issues are. I'm absolutely on your side. I'm a resident myself. I want to carry on the work I've been doing and represent you. And I ask you for your vote.
Thank you very much. Lily for the Labour Party.
Hello, can you hear me at the back? Or shall I come nearer? Just about. Brilliant. Hi, I'm Patrick Lilly, one of the 3 Labour candidates. You are the guardians of the 3 villages, plus Mayfair if you want to be generous, of Soho, Marylebone and Fitzrovia. You are the engaged residents. Who is elected tonight, on Thursday, will be your decision. We all have to live with that decision for 4 years. Do you want more of the same? Or is it time for a change? My connections to the West End go back 40 years. I worked on Cleveland Street. A few years ago I had an office on Carlisle Street. I lived on Great Titchfield Street. I've danced, dined, door knocked throughout the area. And the last 5 years I've spoken to 2,000 people about their concerns in the area. I stood alongside Pancho Lewis and Caroline Saville in 2018. Pancho was elected. I narrowly missed by 27 votes. Pancho was a breath of fresh air. and I hope to be a worthy successor. On the topic of worthy successors, I've spoken to Glenys Roberts, who served as a loyal Conservative councillor for 19 years, and this is what she's told us. For the past 4 years, West End residents have been emailing her for help, having had little satisfaction from their Tory councillors that they elected. She said, "I've been happy to work with Councillor Lewis, who's taken a genuine interest in their quality of life. Jessica, Paul and myself, who came within 27 votes last time, will be excellent successors." And that's from a Conservative councillor for 19 years. We need to protect the amenity of residents. That means helping to protect places like Berwick Street Market, the dry cleaners, the pharmacists. I've helped successful campaigns to protect a doctor's surgery that's had 2,000 patients. It was going to be turned into luxury flats. I helped defend Berwick Street Market from Conservative privatisation. We also helped save the Curzon Cinema in Mayfair, when that was going to be closed down by a property developer who bought the flats on top and was annoyed that there was noise downstairs. These are important places to our community. We oppose the piazzification of Oxford Circus. We want to freeze council tax, reduce waste, and we support a late night levy to pay for more police, more toilets, and a better clean-up in the morning. We applaud Karen Buck and Nicky's efforts to control petty tax. You, the residents, deserve councillors. You, the residents, deserve councillors who will stand up for you against the vested interests of the property developers. We will offer a forensic examination of council plans. We'll offer a listening ear to all residents. And we believe that residents need to be at the heart of the decisions of the council, not part, at the heart of. Thank you.
You'll see from the running order that the next part is going to be questions on a number of subjects. You'll see there's 7 subjects. Now these questions are going to be asked of all the candidates, and they're going to be asked by the various associations and societies that we have here. So I want to say thank you to Michael Bolt, who's the chair of the Marylebone Association, who will be asking questions that have been put to him by his members. I also have Joran Blumen, who's the chair of the Fitzrovia Association, not the chair, forgive me, from the Fitzrovia Association. He's going to be putting questions to the candidates from the members of the association. And of course we've got Tim Lord from the Soho Society who's going to put questions on behalf of the members of the Soho Society. After that, there's a number of written questions that have been given to us, and I'm going to ask members in the audience who've actually posed those questions to ask whichever candidate they want to answer the question they put. And then there's going to be open questions from the floor, and you can ask your questions of any of the candidates at all, about any issues, those that are being raised by the association and the society, or any other questions that you want to raise. So the first question, please, is going to be, the first question is al fresco, noise nuisance and a vision for Soho. And these are questions that are going to be put by Tim Lord.
Good evening, everybody. I'm chair of the Soho Society. I've helped organise tonight. I just, having lived in Soho for 30 years, I wanted to really get to the bottom of this al fresco issue. And I just wanted to remind everybody, because al fresco was when the council closed 14th Street as an emergency measure in 2020, responding to the pandemic and the problems that the businesses faced because they couldn't serve food inside the restaurant, they had to serve it outside. Just though, to see what it was like. This is a video that we took at the time.
So to be fair, didn't one of the Labour candidates take this? Didn't one of the Labour candidates take the video clips? Didn't one of the Labour candidates take the video clips?
Sit down.
Sorry, can you not see it? I mean, it's just one video of hundreds of videos. And you don't want to see anything. Now, I think I have to say some of the history. So in 2020, the Soho Society had a debate on this and we voted to support the businesses. We absolutely agreed that we didn't want to drive them out or put them in a position where they couldn't respond to the pandemic. But we were concerned even in 2020 that the decision to do it was done without any consultation because of the emergency. Now in 2021, the pandemic continued, so fair enough, but the decision to continue alfresco dining, which, just so you remember, is till 11 p.m, 6 nights a week, and 10:30 p.m. on a Sunday in 14 residential streets, and that was, pretty loud. That decision was continued for 2021, and the point when I have to be honest, I really departed company with the council, was the call I got from Tim Barnes on the February 2021 when he said, we're going to repeat this for another summer. And I went, okay, you should really have talked to us more about it because there were practical issues on how alfresco was causing real distress and problems to residents at that point. But he also said, this thing, which the leader of the council promised was temporary, an emergency measure, we're now going to consult on making it permanent. And I came pretty close to begging Tim to say, please do not do that. Because the message to residents was that the stress and suffering that they'd gone through in 2020 and 2021 might continue forever. Now, some residents are lucky and it doesn't impact them. But I am absolutely clear, because I've spoken to so many of them, for some residents, this made their lives misery because they could not sleep in their homes, they could not work in their homes. And I have to say, I do not understand how the council could decide to do that and not engage really seriously with residents on the impact of that intervention. We get through 2021, not only are they, so they've said it might be permanent. There is a very angry call on the 11th of March 2021 with Councillor Green, who's in charge of all of this. He promises, he says, this will not go permanent unless the majority of residents in Soho support it. We go, fine, okay, we can live with that if there is a real consultation. However, then we go into the summer of 2021, and there is a vision for Soho consultation, which the proposals are complex and confusing, but ultimately, many of the proposals include road closures, which would facilitate alfresco dining, pavement widening that would facilitate alfresco dining. And the key promise of this will only happen if residents support it. We finally get a report in February this year that doesn't even bother to report residents' responses separate from business responses. So the promises that were made about alfresco, about it being temporary, that's went out the window. The promise that it would only happen if it was supported by residents appears to be going out the window. And even going into this election period, the consultation finished on the 26th of November last year. Instead of being honest and saying what the council actually wants to do in this area, whether it believes the only way to protect businesses in Soho, the food and beverage businesses, is to have drinking and dining in the street until 11 p.m, 6 or 7 nights a week. That key issue is unresolved because now we have to wait till May for some unstated further consultation that we know nothing about. And I just think it does appear at this stage the council is going to do something because it's worried about the businesses and the adverse impact on residents. We just feel powerless because for the last 2 years we've been saying this is a real issue. We went as far in May in absolute frustration last year because we'd said to the council,
is this a Hustings or a political speech?
No, this is an issue which affects our lives really seriously.
It's my
and I will carry on.
I'm sorry, it's my fault because the party, those who are putting the questions are going to put in context what their questions are. And so Tim is putting in context about alfresco, and the other people who are putting their questions will do that. It's my fault. I should have mentioned that right at the beginning. This is how we're going to do it. So people in the audience, people here at the Hustings who do not know some of the issues that affect the West End ward will be able to have an idea of what is happening in the various areas in the ward. But Tim, if you
I will
want to
do
put your
it.
question, thank
It
you.
will move. It is simply this. What is the current plan in terms of outdoor drinking and dining from the Conservative Council when they come back in May? Are we going to be able to stay in our homes? Is it going to be 11 p.m. at night, 7 days a week, or not?
Now that's a question that's going to be put to every prospective councillor.
Do you want us to do it, or well, we can answer that collectively if you'd rather.
Entirely
whatever's
up to you.
easiest.
Yeah, if you want to do that. If it's easier to do it collectively, both the parties agree to that, then fine.
I think for some of these things, Nina, partly because it'll enable us to take more questions, and there's not necessarily.
No,
we
that's
can hear
fine.
from
Of course, you've got a unified view.
Yeah, on this, I think we.
Of course, on both
So,
sides.
Tim, I appreciate the passion with which you spoke. I don't agree with the characterisation, which won't necessarily surprise you. But I can, without necessarily rehearsing much of the history, give some clear statements about where we are. There was a process that we went through. It's known as a co-creation exercise, where people, residents and businesses in Soho were asked for their ideas, which is what led to a document and a process called Vision for Soho, which has taken place over the last, whatever it is, 6 or 9 months or something like that. But at no point has there been what would be referred to as a formal consultation on that. And the reason for that is the formal consultation is the bit where somebody says, here, out of that process, is a set of things that we are proposing. Do you want to do those, yes or no, and what are your comments? That's the bit that will take place in May, or the timeline that might follow ahead. And that will mean that nothing will happen in any of the activities that have been described or discussed without a majority of the people in that consultation saying that they want that to happen to Soho. None of it. And I give you that promise. I give you that, sorry?
You didn't say residents, you said people.
Residents, yes, residents tend to be
Question
people.
at the end.
Residents tend to be people. Businesses don't get a vote, right? It's residents, it's individual people who characterise on that. And nothing will happen without a majority that's present. And I will absolutely say that if the package that was put forward was to proceed and it did not have a majority approval at the point at which it's put forward, there is not only is there no way that we'll support it, I will resign the whip from the Conservatives. Right? No problem at all.
But Tim, is the majority of the residents?
A majority of the respondents. There's a legal question to have to address. Let me finish the answer to your rest of your questions. Furthermore, there is nothing that is being discussed, and nobody has even requested, whether it be a resident or a business, that looks like al fresco as it took place during lockdown. There are no proposals, none, anywhere, to see 14 streets or any other number of streets closed for the purposes of taking end to end and putting out tables and chairs 1 night a week, 2 nights a week, 3 nights a week, 4 nights a week, 5 nights a week, 6 nights a week, or 7 nights a week. There is no proposal to do that. There was no request, not even the businesses asked for that to be repeated. The idea is purely to look at the ways in which we might take some of the things that many residents, as well as visitors, liked, and are there things that we might be able to do with those? And the answer is no, we're not going to do anything like the scale of what existed in lockdown. Nothing like that. There is no proposal to do so. There is no proposal from anybody. There will be no vote on it because nobody's asked for it to reconstitute lockdown type al fresco. It isn't on the table. It isn't going to happen. It isn't a proposal that anybody is has brought to me as the lead member for Soho, or as far as I'm aware that Councillor Green has seen, or anybody else. That isn't on the table, and I can categorically state that it's not just my view and the view of those here, but probably the view of every Conservative in the room, and probably the view of every member of the Conservative group, that we are not proposing, and there will not be a repeat, categorically, of al fresco as was put down during lockdown. I can't think of more ways to phrase that to say it isn't going to happen, right? There isn't a proposal to do that. There are ideas that will make up, there are the ideas that will look at whether or not we might be able to extend pavements and to look at a whole load of other bits and pieces, reversing traffic flows, redoing some of the public squares and so on. They'll be presented as a package. And whether or not you like them or don't like them, the second part of the promise I will make to you is not only that there is no proposal to do that, but the package that is put before you will only happen if the consultation says yes. We've had individual streets across Westminster where people wanted to see the street closures that they see. We had one in Mayfair, there's been one in Marylebone, there's one in Regent's Park. And where that's happened, and there was local people who said we want to do this, we were able to enact it. We won't do that if people here don't want it. It won't be a mass vote with visitors, it won't be anything else, it will be if the people don't want it. I don't know how to make it any clearer than that, but there will not be a repeat of al fresco as happened. It isn't on the cards, and you won't get to vote on it because nobody wants it. And the package that is put forward will be something will only proceed if there is a majority of people in favour.
Thank you very much. Who's going to be the spokesperson for the Labour Party?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Paul, if you want to respond.
Look, al fresco had its time and its place. It was terribly managed in Soho. It was quite well managed in Fitzrovia. So we have a good example of where actually al fresco dining is not always and inevitably going to be a disaster. I'm afraid it was, particularly in the west of Soho, where there was an intense concentration.
In the east?
No, I actually mean the west.
Really?
Where this was the intense concentration of al fresco dining, which caused huge problems for families. And I just want to stress, of course, that outside, I don't know whether everyone here lives in Soho, but outside, lots of people will say, well, if you don't like it, then you can leave Soho. You often hear this said. Well, I'm afraid, firstly, that's not a response, a legitimate grown-up response to residents. But secondly, about a third of housing in Soho is social housing. These aren't people who always elect to live in Soho. So I just want to park that, because I know lots of people will say that it's your decision to live there and you have to put up with it. And I'm afraid that is the implied response. I know that no one has said it officially, but that is the implied response that we get from the council, because I'm afraid they are not listening. Let's look at these extended plans that Tim has just spoken about. It was asserted a moment ago that we won't be returning to al fresco as it was during lockdown. Well, that may well be the case, but I'm very, very uncertain about what these alternative plans will actually produce. And I am also sure that those who are consulting on those plans, the private third-party entity who's paid a significant amount of money to consult on Vision for Soho, aren't entirely certain where those plans are heading. My biggest concern, though, with Vision for Soho, which I think is what Tim is alluding to, is that it forgets that we've only just ratified across the ward 4 separate, fantastic neighbourhood local plans. Those were ratified in a referendum. So when Tim talks about nothing happening in the future without the endorsement of local people, forget consultations. There were referendums held in Soho, in Mayfair, in Marylebone and in Fitzrovia. We have the local plans in place already. And those neighbourhood plans, not the Vision for Soho, as it currently stands, should be the starting point for determining how we best use the public realm going forward. And I want to provide a really, really clear commitment to everyone in the room from my perspective, and also, I think, speaking on behalf of my colleagues. We don't want to see any more of the public realm being taken and surrendered to commercial interests. We must have proper consultations with residents. And the starting point, I said to you earlier, the starting point must be residents' interests first. That doesn't mean a zero-sum game, and I say that because if you identify and protect the characteristics in these villages that residents most love, you will also make these villages attractive for other people who want to come and see its history and its communities. So my firm commitment is the surrender of the public realm has to stop. And I will certainly be scrutinising the council's decisions if I'm elected on the 5th of May. They will not be getting away with what has been happening in Soho over the past few years.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I just have to say, I'm sorry about this. Vision
Have
for
you another
Soho.
question
Vision for
to
Soho.
put?
Vision for Soho Phase 3. These are the boards. Vision for Soho Phase 3 has not been withdrawn. It has only been suspended. It explicitly says that these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 streets will be subject to timed road closures in an identical form to al fresco. That is currently the proposal. These streets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and all of Soho Square and Golden Square may have widening. Now, the situation is the government...
point of fact there. What al fresco dining took place in Great Chapel Street? Just picking you up on whether you're being correct here. Tell me what al fresco, because it's behind Crossrail hoarding and has been throughout the period. So there wasn't al fresco
This is their
dining.
proposal.
No, you said the same. You've just said they're trying to do the same
Right, well,
thing.
can
You're
Tim-
misleading people.
Can Tim
I'm
just
not
put it-
standing, but I will have the truth out on this because it's a
Well,
really
can I
issue.
just
And
stop?
I am allowed to ask this
Can
question.
I stop?
Is this
Can
the
I
Vision
stop
for
the
Soho
over
3
talking?
proposals?
No.
Tim, if you want to put the
Why
question,
is it not?
please.
Okay,
Not,
can I
No,
answer this?
well, how can
Tim,
what is the question on that?
there is literally no question, and the reason there's no question is you've just said there is nothing currently proposed, and the council's own documents published last year explicitly propose it. And I just don't
So
understand.
the situation is that as far as the Soho Society is concerned, these are the proposals for al fresco dining, and this is what's going to happen, contrary to what you've already said.
That's
Tim.
correct.
Do you want to address that?
I do. Thank you, Nina. I appreciate that. As Tim pointed out, there were a series of conversations as part of the co-creation exercise for Vision for Soho. I think you said these were on the boards that were placed in one of the displays. I'm not trying to pick up on a fact. There were also individual workshop conversations where people were invited in, and there were other ideas put forward, the majority of which will also not take place. The point was that people were asked what they thought. Here were provocations. Do you think this should happen? What about this? Oh, we'll listen to that idea. Oh, I was going to say Yoram, but I should probably pick somebody who actually lives in Soho. Jonathan had said this, or, as a councillor, or Giles had said this. And those conversations took place. The final package that will make up Vision for Soho has not been put forward.
With whom?
With whom? Sorry, correcting my grammar, or...
With whom were these consultations taking place?
With whom? So the consultations...
The residents never ever heard of any of it.
More individuals participated in the physical meetings. That's the workshops and the people who came to the display boards, including the one we had on Broadwick Street and elsewhere, than took part and voted in the neighbourhood plan referendum that Paul alluded to earlier. There were more people who participated, and I saw many people, some of whom were in this room, Matthew Bennett and others, taking part in some of those conversations. But I also need to, so I can be very clear that this, and what was presented on the boards in the final one of those phase 3, is not the final package that was proposed. They were part of the discussions. We haven't seen that final package. I'm only telling you what I am absolutely committing to, and what I've said in my previous comments won't be that. But I also need to correct another fact that was deliberately and knowingly misleading, and one that that Paul made a second ago. There is no contradiction in the idea that the neighbourhood plan was passed and that the Vision for Soho comes later. The neighbourhood plan was passed in a referendum and is part of planning guidance, that being where it sits, that has been enacted and is already forming part of the guidance on which planning decisions are made within Soho, the sort that Owen sits on and discusses in planning commission.
What was the point of that, apart from...
I'm just explaining that. So that just deals with planning. It gives you a planning framework. It doesn't deal with placemaking. There's a whole load of things that were put forward in the plan where residents said we'd like to see this, but was out of scope for the legal framework of a plan for Soho. The Vision for Soho covers some of that. It says here's some of the implementation for it. Here's £2 million that we might use in order to implement that. in order to enact some of what was there. What the plan for Soho and the Soho Neighbourhood Forum put in their document was considerably further than most of the people put into other neighbourhood plans, and required a more integrated resolution to the very complex problems of Soho. But there is no contradiction between those, and nothing in vision will overrule what was in the plan. Nothing. No, please do.
You can ask questions at the end, I'm afraid. Otherwise, we're going to be on this topic for far too long. I will be opening up questions to the floor, so please make a note of the questions and you can put those. I want Paul to respond now, obviously to the point that Tim has raised, and anything that he wants to say about Tim's final comments.
Yeah, just very briefly. We've just heard, I'm afraid, something that I've always been concerned with, which is the suggestion that because participation in the vision for Soho is greater than the plans, which is incorrect. I agree, and I'll come on to that. It is incorrect. But, well, actually you did, Tim. I wrote it down. You said that participation of people in the Vision for Soho consultation was higher.
I said co-creation. I didn't say it was a consultation, because the consultation hasn't happened yet.
Well, let's come back to that. But the point is a very clear one. The point is a very clear one. The electorate have ratified their local plans. They must be the starting point.
Which they
for
are.
Well, let's come back to the Vision for Soho very briefly. It's time to pause the Vision for Soho. We need to take stock. We need to think about the sort of money we're paying to consultancy services to do what the council should be doing in its own right, which is listening to residents. And we need also to remember that if we have a look at the consultation process that has been underway so far, that I think has engaged something like 4% of residents so far, Tim.
The response rate to the online survey was 4%. About 109 people responded, 2,600 people this week.
Thank you, Tim. So actually the response rate has been quite low, and my concern is that the Vision for Soho, the consultation process can be engineered to achieve a certain result in the end. So I just repeat what I've said already, which is we must start with the local plans. And the Soho plan was crafted over several years.
Yes.
Between residents.
It's already there.
Tim,
sorry, it's not a contradiction.
hang a second. I've let Tim speak. Let's give me the respect
You can all ask
that I deserve as a candidate.
Sorry
All right,
to
that's
interrupt,
fine.
but I'll reiterate this.
Thank you, Tim.
You can ask questions from the floor at the end. Can you please give the courtesy of all the candidates an opportunity to speak?
So very, very briefly, the Vision for Soho was crafted. The local plans. You're getting me confused now, Tim. The local plans were crafted between local residents and businesses.
Yep.
This is not a zero-sum game. But I do think the Vision for Soho currently is a distraction from enforcing the plans themselves. And we must return to those plans as ratified by local residents.
Thank you very much. Turning on to the second question. This is about piazzas and Oxford Street closures, and questions are going to be put by Michael from the Marylebone Association and Yoram from the Fitzrovia Association.
Okay.
Yoram starting.
Yes, I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to, hello everybody, good evening, now you can hear me. I am going to put the question in. Sorry, I'll try and shout. Good evening everybody. Hello everybody. And the issue of Oxford Street, the digitalisation of part of Oxford Street, piazzas, etc., have been on the agenda for many years. It greatly impacts Fitzrovia and Marylebone. Michael is going to ask a question on his own. I want to put it into context. The context is that whatever proposals you have about Oxford Street, or parts of Oxford Street, you're going to divert the traffic away from Oxford Street into nearby streets. Those streets, as somebody said, they are sort of built for coach and horses, and I'm quoting, and it's absolutely true. In Fitzrovia, and I'm just going to concentrate on Fitzrovia. In Fitzrovia, from what we have seen, and we have not seen all the plans, we were not given all the results. We were not given some reports, even though we asked for freedom of information requests that was turned down. But anyway, our understanding is that in Fitzrovia we will have a considerable revision of one-way streets, which were there in the 80s to protect residents' amenities. Furthermore, in the heart of Victoria and in the heart of Marylebone, you've got Wigmore Street turning into Mortimer Street. That would be two-way street, already congested. This is, the result would be very simple. More congestion, more pollution, more noise. Those are three of the main topics that impact directly the quality of lives of residents and the livelihood of small businesses, which are not so well represented as the other businesses, shall we say it this way. There is, naturally, the residents object. They don't accept those proposals, and we don't want to see it enacted. Next.
Thank you. Michael Bolt, Marylebone Association. Yoram's sort of given some certain detail, I won't repeat all that, and there's a lot to get through tonight. So Oxford Street, though, is very important to you here in Soho. It's very important to those in Fitzrovia. It's equally important in Marylebone. And the issue, as Yoram said, is that the closure will mean the traffic goes through the streets around it. And that has always been our concern. So much is our concern that in 2018, 4 years ago, there was a party that actually stood on the basis of that one issue alone, which got quite a substantial number of votes. And so it's important that tonight we do hear views from the candidates standing as to where they feel we presently lie. Because Westminster, as a result of that party, uncoupled itself from TfL. You went into 2018 with a proposal to pedestrianise Oxford Street. You came out at the elections with Westminster saying they didn't intend to do that, giving an electoral promise. An electoral promise was, in case anybody's forgotten, that Oxford Street will remain open to traffic. So since then, there have been a series of proposals that seem to have forgotten that promise. And one of them, the piazzas with a closed Oxford Street Oxford Circus, which obviously would mean that it wasn't open to traffic, and that was actually started and then stopped and then put on hold, but it hasn't been scuppered. So we'd like to know tonight from the candidates here what their view is on that. But it's not only that proposal of the rubbers. If anybody has taken the trouble to read a very long document called the Oxford Street District Project, in that the rubber proposals, like closing the area around Selfridges, the road in the Selfridges block, to all traffic apart from buses, most of the day. And that's something that's still on the cards. That would be another way of diverting traffic through our neighbourhoods. So it's very important for us tonight to know where our local candidates stand. 4 years ago, there were 9 candidates. There were 3 separate wards we could ask about this. BDS ward, Marylebone High Street and West End. Because the ward changes, and that's a very important point, it is now all down to these people here. Marylebone ward is now pushed above Wigmore Street, and so there's no direct say in it, and BDS ward has disappeared. So it's the 3 candidates that will be elected here that will have the most say on what's happening on Oxford Street. So the question that our residents would like to put to these candidates here tonight, and we'd like to put them individually so that we actually can remember the responses of each candidate after the election, and that is, will the promise made by Westminster Council in the 2018 election that Oxford Street remain open to traffic, will that be honoured by any of the candidates standing here tonight? And basically, it would be quite nice if we had an unambiguous reply, which doesn't include we will let the residents decide this, or any such thing, because the residents have decided that and made that quite clear. So if we can just concentrate on an answer to that, we'd be obliged. Thank you.
And I think Michael has asked that all the candidates answer this question. Basically, road closure in Oxford Street was the suggestion or the promise that it's going to be remain open, going to be honoured. And so can I have the answers, please? Can I start then, Julie, and then I'll come to Patrick.
No,
Julie first and then Patrick, please.
So this is actually a topic very close to my heart, and I obviously have sat on the Marylebone Association for the last couple of years and have seen how hard Michael and many residents have worked over the last few years to previously stop the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street. As a resident, I know that if Oxford Circus would close down, or if we narrow streets, that it will have a huge impact on the families that live in the area, because all of the traffic, the cabs, will be pushed into these smaller streets. And I know, as I walk my child to school along Wigmore Street, Seymour Street, and having more traffic there, and I know a lot of the businesses, a lot of the residents in the area, and they feel the same. So I really do believe it's something that is very, very important to everyone here. You know, we've had Park Lane with cycle lanes, a few roads narrowing around Euston Street, and we're kind of boxed in. And then to have everything else pedestrianised is just not going to work. So for me, I feel the same, and nothing will happen as far as I'm aware, and I've had the assurance of that. So that's where I stand on it.
Patrick, please.
Hi. Westminster Labour, West End Labour, we oppose the backdoor pedestrianisation of Oxford Street by blocking Oxford Circus, which will be the equivalent of Regent Street's narrowing on steroids. At the moment, if you go down Regent Street, you have one lane. If a bus stops, the ambulance stops, the fire engine stops, the taxi stop, then they back down into the other streets. It's insane to block Oxford Street via Oxford Circus. We've written to 500 residents affected by this, and the response has been overwhelmingly opposed to it. So I hope and pray that Jessica and Paul will back me up on this. We shudder at the mess of Regent Street. I was the first Labour candidate to oppose the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street. I would say something quite shocking now. I told our party leader that I needed to tell him I oppose it, and he said, "I'll shoot your kneecaps off." Okay? Now, that's a metaphor, but 3 days later, he asked me to write it up as our policy. We had listened to the residents, and we changed our minds. Soon after, our opponents changed their minds, and it was dropped like a hot brick. So total respect for the Capox party, who did citizen power, and you told the council loudly, now you need to tell them Labour will oppose the pedestrianisation.
I'll then turn to Owen and then Jessica, please.
I very much welcome this question. I live in Fitzrovia, close to Yoram, and share all his concerns. Very concerned with buses going down Waterford Street and traffic both ways, and I think it would be a disaster. We've decided not to do it, the council. We listened to residents and we responded to it. I think the Labour Party is being very disingenuous. If the Labour Party is elected, they will hand it over to Sadiq Khan and the whole thing will be pedestrianised. He's currently running the most polluting buses of them all down Oxford Street, not doing any electric ones down there because he wants to frighten us, and he's causing great damage in the process. If you want to avoid pedestrianisation of Oxford Street, do not vote Labour. Conservative Party have abandoned it. There are challenges. Oxford Street is in malaise. There are candy stores all down it. There's Crossrail coming. There's going to be a lot of people coming out. Thankfully, they're disgorging slightly outside Oxford Street itself. But there will be challenges with how Oxford Street is managed. But closing off the street has been ruled out by the council, and certainly my view. And I echo all the things that Yoram said at the beginning.
Well, we couldn't be more clear that we're opposed to the closure of Oxford Street and the piazzas. as Michael has helpfully pointed out, it's because of the impact of traffic on the streets and residents in the neighbouring areas. The air pollution, the traffic, etc. would all be unbearable for residents. Combined with other proposals around, there's just nowhere else for vehicles to go. Now, the other thing I find quite offensive about this whole process is that the council has spent £80 million on consultants to try to push through something that residents have been very clear that they don't want. We're also seeing the increase in use of emergency powers to change the public realm. Outside of King's College on the Strand, we've seen the narrowing of Regent Street, which is causing unbearable problems for residents. So, can't be more clear, we oppose the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street. Thank you.
Then Tim and Paul, finally on this subject.
Michael, do you mind just repeating the wording that you offered at the beginning and the challenge to the candidates?
Yes, I'll do that.
I'll give you a second.
No, that's all right. So the exact wording, I've got it right. Would you try and ensure that the 2018 promise to keep the street open was honoured by guaranteeing you will vote against any proposal to restrict traffic on Oxford Street? And I'm glad you asked me to read that again, because I notice everybody's concentrating on piazzas, but the question's wider than that. It's any proposal to restrict traffic on Oxford Street, which includes, for instance, the other example I gave, which is part-time, daytime closures outside Selfridges for anything but buses.
So, yes. I can't,
Well,
absolutely.
that's
And let me give you... I'll take that. Let me give you a little bit of context about why I think that's going to be harder for the speakers to my right than they've necessarily suggested. I take the point that you've made, both of two speakers, that it's West End Labour's policy to oppose those two. Unfortunately, the senior Labour figure in London is Sadiq Khan. It remains his policy to fully pedestrianise Oxford Street. In fact, to all traffic all of the time. But critically, his largest single agency, which is TfL, has already got plans for how they wish to rework Oxford Circus Tube Station, which, by the way, is largely necessary, as anybody who has tried to see the crowds at that station will know. But it includes moving entrances up and down on the north and south exits to Oxford Street that would require some of those side roads to be removed. It would require buses to be rerouted, and the only person that has the plans to do that is him, and it remains Labour's policy to move the buses along Oxford Street and to pedestrianise the street fully. From the senior person in charge of the Labour Party's policies around transport in London, it is their policy. And I respect the fact that this team may disagree, but it remains the fact that's there. What I would ask them, and ask their final speaker if you can, is whether or not he will undertake to table a motion at the Labour London conference to reverse that decision by Sadiq.
I didn't realise the candidates were asking questions of the candidates. I've got plenty for Tim. Well, yes, quite. There are a lot of Conservative members in the room, clearly.
Can everybody in the room please give a courtesy to the candidates to speak? You will have an opportunity to ask questions rather than just heckling. Paul, would you like to
absolutely. I will vote against traffic restrictions on Oxford Street and around the Oxford Street piazzas and Oxford Circus. That's as clear a commitment as anyone can give. That is my commitment as a councillor candidate in these elections. And I will also say this, Sadiq Khan doesn't determine Labour group policy on the council. And it's interesting that you refer to that, because we have our own policies, and always have done, in the Westminster Labour group.
I accept that.
And that is what drives our policy in the West End. So that's as clear a commitment as I can give you, Michael. And it's a fair question.
I think, Michael, you want to
Yes,
make one further point before we move on.
Quick comeback to what Tim said, which, to be honest, surprised me, was lack of ambiguity. Why, if it's that clear, haven't we been told that by, say, Matthew Green? Why hadn't that been stated? Because all we've ever heard from the council is that this is going to be reviewed. And so if it is that clear that there really is going to be no further, the piazza is not going to be brought back, or it's going to be no further consideration of the other proposal, the OSD document, how come Tim knows that, but none of the rest of us do. I mean, I'm asking a genuine question, and if policy change has been formulated by Westminster, that's great news. But is this just Tim saying this, or has something happened higher up that we haven't been told about?
Michael, you asked if I would vote against it, which I said I would.
Yes.
So that was the level at which I have knowledge and my ability to give a guarantee. My knowledge of what was there was Matthew Green inherited the outline of that proposal when Councillor Kaplan stepped down. And it was my conversations, along with one or two others with Matthew, that meant we pointed out why we didn't think, A, that was a good idea, and B, ran contrary to the undertakings we had given, that led to him to remove it and take it off the agenda.
I mean, I have 30 seconds.
Yes. Patrick, if you want
I
to
just
respond
one
to that.
final addendum. I think it's fantastic that somewhere along the line we're all sounding like we're on the same page, which is good news. But what I would say to the audience here tonight and to the voters on Thursday is, who do you trust? Who do you trust? Do you trust the Conservative Party and the way that, pardon me, and the way, pardon me, do you trust the Conservative Party? Do you trust Boris Johnson's Conservative Party?
Come on now.
Do you trust Boris Johnson's Conservative Council? Pardon me, Julie and I live the equidistance outside the ward.
Can we get through this?
Yep. Yeah, is that fair enough? It's okay for Julie
Patrick, do you want
to live outside the wood. Surely it's okay for me. Is it? Yes, for 25 years.
I appreciate these are hustings, but we've got a lot of information to get through, which is really important for the elections next week. Patrick, do you want to just continue, or have had you say?
I think we've all had our say on this topic. And
Is Oxford Street still open to traffic? So has the promise made in 2018 been maintained?
Right, you can ask.
No, I'm just saying, as far as I'm aware, it's still open to
Well, you can
traffic.
ask.
it's open to some traffic. Some traffic.
As long as we're clear about the fact, it's still
I'm going to
open.
move on to the third item.
Jonathan, I need to live it on
Licensing and cumulative impact. This is a question by the Soho Society, Marine the Temperature, and then a question by Yoram regarding enforcement.
Yes, it's a very simple question. I think that what I'm going to say is shared by everybody, all the societies in the West End. It's basically the duration in our quality of life. And what it means in the context. The context is of more premises license being granted for longer hours. We have more. We had the al fresco issue. We have short-term lets, including, unfortunately, during COVID time, we had the party nights lets. We have street closures. We have work being done at unsocial hours. We have gym playing music, which is a relatively new phenomenon. I will only mention one firm called F45, you know them. And we had therefore a cumulative significant increase in public nuisance. Now, the basic tool that can control it is good enforcement and good enforcement resources. This is an issue because we gained the impression, and that's a report we keep getting from our members, that the enforcement people we have are good, they're doing a good job, they're professional, we actually respect what they do, but they are struggling, they're really, really struggling. Response times are getting longer. Some of the processes are no longer adequate to the new challenges. Now, all sorts of commitments, policies, paper, whatever, is not worth the paper it's printed on unless you have effective enforcement. So, what I propose to you is that you support, are you prepared to support extra enforcement resources for the West, dedicated to the West End ward, because this is where most of the incidents of antisocial behaviour, public nuisance, late licenses, etc., are. I mean, we had that presented very well last year, where Heather Acton gave us an outview, and the statistics, very, very good work, and very, very good statistics on where exactly the trouble spots are, and indeed in this ward. So this is the question which I have for you. Would you support or consider adding resources that would deal specifically with the West End, so we have timely response to residents and everyone else?
Tim, will you answer that for the Conservatives and then Paul, or is there somebody else, another candidate who wants to take that question?
I don't mind saying something.
All right. Owen, do you want to take
Shall I
that
start off
question?
and then...
Yeah, okay.
No, I've just asked for one person now.
All right.
This isn't a question for everybody. So, Owen, if you want to respond.
Well, my answer is yes. I absolutely would support it. We are beginning to do that, but I think lots more needs to be done. There's been a 50% increase in enforcement, for instance, on commercial waste recently. I think given the amount of revenue generation from businesses in the West End, there should be a disproportionate resources given to waste, to antisocial behaviour, all these things. 50% of all the enforcement teams are here. Yeah, 50% of all the enforcement teams are already here, I'm being told. But I think absolutely, I think enforcement is becoming absolutely critical issue. And for instance, we've begun putting CCTV in certain hotspots for waste dumping to be able to catch the culprits and deal with them. Only a few of those have happened so far. Sorry? Yeah, we've begun to put some CCTV cameras in waste dumping hotspots in order to try and catch the culprits, initially to warn them, but then obviously later to enforce them. In all sorts of ways, I think enforcement is becoming an absolutely key issue, and I absolutely would support the increased resources you're speaking of. And I think given the level of business activity here, we shouldn't be having, I mean, it sounds like we don't currently, but we should definitely be having a disproportionate enforcement effort in the West End.
Who's going to respond for Labour?
Yeah, I will be, and I promise I'll shut up then. I've spoken too much tonight. I think we're in agreement on this, and there are areas where we can constructively agree, I hope, and greater resources for enforcement are one thing. But I think there's much more to do on this, Yoram, and I think in particular, when it comes to noise monitoring, we have a commitment from Councillor Green that noise monitoring was going to be put into place in the ward. If I'm elected and my colleagues are elected on the 5th of May, we're going to be holding him to that commitment, and I'm going to seek a further commitment from him at the council level that he is going to roll out that noise monitoring machinery throughout Soho. The other point I'd make is that we also need to reform the approach to informing the council about noise. At the moment, if you make a complaint at 3 a.m. in the morning, you need to sit by your phone and wait for a good half an hour. If you're someone working in the NHS and living in a flat in Soho, as somebody was that I knocked on the door of the other day, that is not an attractive proposition, but you still can't get to sleep until 5 a.m. So we need better response times, and more importantly, we need to ensure that when you make a complaint, as a complainant, you get feedback. Somebody calls you again and tells you what they're doing about the systemic problem with noise outside your flat. At the moment, that's not the case, unfortunately. We also want to see the late night levy, which other councils impose on establishments, introduced in Soho, and that's a Labour group-wide policy. The late night levy will be imposed on establishments and can be used to, for example, give greater resources in terms of enforcement and back up the budget for doing that. So we want the imposition of a late night levy across the ward and across Westminster. The other point I'd make is we are living in a cumulative impact area. There should be a presumption, and Heather, it's an Acton, Heather Acton, I always get a name wrong. What's that, sorry?
Yes, Heather Acton.
Heather Acton made a commitment, and it's on paper, that there is a presumption against granting new alcohol licences in cumulative impact areas. It's absolutely essential that that's enforced, because at present it isn't. They are granting new alcohol licences in Soho, and I'm afraid there isn't really a need for more alcohol establishments in Soho. Just to give you an example, last year I think there were 105 applications made for licensing in the Soho area. Only 5 of those, I believe, and Marina is the expert here, only 5 of those were actually outright rejected, which is a very small proportion of the total applications made, and that's worrying as far as I can see. Another 5 were either accepted with conditions or amended in some way. Again, far too low, and it suggests that the monitoring of licences, the enforcement of the neighbourhood plans and licensing policies of the council is not what it should be. So it's about more than just committing resources. We need to think carefully about how we revolutionise, and I don't use that word lightly, our approach to addressing noise, not just in Soho, but across the ward.
Privatisation of public space, and both Michael and Joran have questions because who wants to start? Joran, do you want to start?
Yeah, all right, after that. And it's about Regent Street, actually, public space, the use of public space. And I'm going to put it a little bit provocatively because that's how it was put to me in the summer when we were doing our own consultations or asking residents to vote for a neighbourhood plan in the neighbourhood forum. Somebody asked me, who owns Regent Street? Is it Westminster or is it Crown Estate? And the reason is very simple, because basically, because of COVID, the impression that we gain as residents is that Crown Estate took it over. They are the one who paid for the plants. The plants look really great, but the price is horrendous. We tried to do some planting in our area, and we just found out what the price was. It's horrendous. And the other thing is, if they look at their planning at the website, they are not consulted on the future of Regent Street. Now, with all due respect to them and to what they do, they really do own the buildings, but they don't own the public highway. The impression is that they were allowed to run away with it, or to run the show, which is, I'm sure, is not the intention. What we are concerned looking into the future of what is going to happen next year when the money runs out for all those plans. What is Westminster as a council going to do, and how they're going to consult with everybody about the fate of Regent Street and what goes on in there? Because it has been mentioned before, Patrick has mentioned it, Regent Street is packed now, traffic jams. It's to do with the phasing by TfL, but it's also to do with the narrowing to one lane. This is a major thoroughfare, and it has an impact on us, on Soho as well. So what we want from the council to do with consultation is any council, clarity and real meaningful consultation with residents and counterparts in a way that would get us involved at an early stage, and not a working group with this and working group with that, or a working group with others of which we're not aware of. When it comes to consultation, we really need to be there as residents.
So I think the question is, there was
a question at the end of it on a specific point.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I don't
Say
mind.
otherwise it's going to summarise.
Yeah.
You can do that with mine.
Okay, so privatisation of public space, Joran's mentioned Regent Street, the one at Oxford Street, same thing, someone mentioned earlier, well, the traffic's still flowing, it's not flowing as well as it did, because it's narrowed. And the same problems with Regent Street do occur on Oxford Street, and the problems with that is that once the traffic starts backing up, it flows into the hinterland. Privatisation of public space, the Piazza is a classic example. If it was to come to be, then Crown Estate will gain greatly because they own the properties around the Piazza. Privatisation of public space, Manchester Square. We just had a non-consultation. We now have that inflicted on our area, and that means that the top part of Manchester Square in Marylebone is now going to be a sort of piazza close to traffic, and we know the traffic's going to go, it's going to go elsewhere in Marylebone. So privatisation of public space, Cavendish Square, the Spiegel tent. Once again, a COVID measure, we were told it was a one-off. Now it's come back. Once again, it's come back without any proper consultation. So there are a lot of issues here. But just to focus, say, on one for a question for each individual councillor, Spiegel tent. That's caused a lot of annoyance really in the area because it just feels as imposed upon us. We've got one green space north of Oxford Street until you go as far as Peckham Gardens. That one green space happens to be where they want to put a Spiegel tent, which is of course Cavendish Square. What for? Westminster are convinced, Westminster Council is convinced that this is going to increase the vibrancy of the area. It's a tent for drinking and serving hamburgers. You can get that almost anywhere in Oxford Street, 100 places. Why is a tent serving more hamburgers and more beer going to increase vibrancy? What it does do, it stymies the residents and business workers, everything like that. For most of the summer, they can no longer use it. Where is the sense in that? I'd like each councillor...
Question.
Each councillor to tell us whether they support the Spiegel tent, yes or no, and whether it's to come round again, and it probably will, because the working Cavendish Square will take some time to start, whether they would oppose it.
I think there is another question that Joram was asking as well, and that's about consultation, and that any project should involve the people who live in the area or the associations and the societies from the beginning. So there's two different questions. Michael, do you want every single member to answer your question about
Yes or no?
No, it's fine.
Do we oppose
let's
the
deal with the consultation question
Chris?
as a group,
Yeah.
and then the Spiegel tent individually. Yes or no? It's very simple, I suspect. I think that's the answer. You may not get.
You have a yes no card or candidate.
But is the question,
Spiegel tent, yes or no? Hold it up. Hold it up.
No, this one was speaking.
We just want to put some context.
We are going to abstaining.
Tim, if you want to put it in context.
Oh, no, Julie was trying to speak before you
Right,
got up there.
Julie, if you want to deal with the Spiegel tent. Okay,
So would
yes,
we.
thank you.
Okay, so the Spiegel tent is on my doorstep. I walk by New Cavendish Square nearly every day into John Lewis, so I do. I've seen the process and the progress every day. For me, being a mother, having a child, green spaces are very, very important. But also for my friends, for residents in the area, green spaces are really, really important in terms of just some quiet time. People that are running businesses that eat their lunch in New Cavendish Square. So for me, I'm not a big fan of the Spiegel tent, and it's something that I would vote against.
I'll ask Patrick to put his view, and then I'll go through each candidate.
I think we all said no to that one, but I want to give you a quote from a letter that we had a copy of. It says, "We feel that residents are not being properly listened to and their voice not heard, either through their representative councillors or in the mechanism that Westminster City Council uses to consult prior to bringing in certain new schemes within the area." That letter was signed by every single amenity society in Westminster. If anyone wants a copy of it, you're very welcome to it. But it's stunning that these community groups, like the Marylebone Association, like the Soho Society, like the Fitzrovia Neighbourhood Association, everyone involved here feel that Westminster Council are not engaging correctly. We need to reboot this relationship and start afresh on Friday morning next week.
So I come at this from three angles. I'm very much a local resident to Cavendish Square, and I didn't enjoy the tents being there last year. I personally am opposed to it. I canvassed some of the, obviously as part of my approach to the ward, I've canvassed various people in the area and spoken to some of them. I've heard some opposition to it from residents close to the square. But I also sat on a planning committee that approved this application. I was the only person on the committee who didn't support the proposal. The Labour member of the committee nodded it through without asking any questions. I raised 5 distinct issues, asked for satisfaction on all of them. One of them was about consultation, because the only local resident who actually wrote in. There were two residents objected. Only one lived very close. It was a couple, and they said that they didn't feel they'd had a letter asking them for their views. So I asked the question. What was the resident consultation on this in terms of the letter, the typical notices going out? And the answer I was given, I take on trust, was that 293 of them were sent. This particular resident, in fact, uses a PO box and doesn't take mail at their actual address, so maybe there was a problem there. So 293 people were consulted on it, but anyway, I came to the conclusion that the issues of noise had not been addressed properly, and on planning grounds, obviously on a planning committee, you're acting slightly independently of your own view, you're acting in a sort of quasi-judicial capacity. No objections had been received the previous year about noise, which was, as a person opposed to it, I was annoyed about that. I mean, I wish if more people objected, it would give me more grounds to speak up. Only two residents actually wrote an objection, only two letters received an objection. One was from some distance away. And there was a councillor who objected, who's sitting over there, one of the West End Ward councillors now. The Maritime Association did object, and I raised their concerns at the meeting. I was the only person who didn't support this motion. The Labour member voted it through without asking any questions.
I want to go back to the wider question about privatisation of public space, and we certainly share the concerns that residents have about the fact that this is happening far too often. I already alluded to what happened outside of King's College, and the question I have is always who benefits, and it's clearly not the residents. Private organisations are clearly benefiting from privatising these spaces, and we have real worries about what further pedestrianisation proposals will bring. On consultation, I mean, far too often consultation processes appear to be designed to push through decisions that have already been made. And the whole process is frankly stuck in the dark ages. I mean, many a letter may have gone out, but the numbers of people who respond to those and receive those is so small, and it's just no longer fit for purpose. So I think there needs to be a huge revamp of the consultation process. It needs to be bedded in from the beginning if there are any proposals to change anything in the area. I worked for an NGO for a few years that did built environment projects overseas, not in the UK. And we started with, how do we speak to the local community? How can we do it in an innovative way? How can we reach not just the influencers, but a wider perspective of people? And I haven't seen it done well in the UK in any projects I've been involved in. So, commitment from me to work with Labour colleagues and Conservative colleagues on the council to really improve that system, because nobody's happy with it. Thank you.
Specifically on the Spiegel tent for a moment, despite Michael's slightly, what was it, a place for hamburgers and something, drinking, I think the combination of hamburgers and beer is probably quite an enticing prospect. But the Spiegel tent itself is actually a venue with comedy and cabaret acts and things like that. There are other activities there. And Cavendish Square is an area that's historically had a number of significant issues. It is the base, for example, from which the organised begging is run through most of the West End, or at least it was historically before the Spiegel tent was there last year. And I hope that many of the things that Owen has talked about will make a difference, a positive difference to the experience of those who live near it. But to answer the question directly, if I was given a direct vote on it, I would vote against it.
Thank you. And Paul, please.
Yeah, Michael, I'm sorry, I keep giving very boring answers to your questions, but my answer is really simple. I would also vote against it. Just one point, though. It was said by Owen earlier that being a member of the majority party gave him a bit of clout. On this issue, it didn't work, did it?
But this is a judicial.
I appreciate it's not whipped, but I do stress though that on the planning committee you will have a majority.
It would be improper. It would be proper in a judicial capacity to do that.
No, absolutely, but you've raised yourself.
As a lawyer, you might appreciate it.
No, absolutely. I'm glad the Conservative membership in the room enjoyed that. But the point I'm making is a very, very simple one, which is that you were criticising a Labour colleague on the committee,
He
but
saw
actually that
the
was
reports
equally.
and he didn't raise questions.
You have my answer, Michael.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So, Michael, I think you do want to raise something about consultation. Is it a very very brief.
Yeah, that'll be, and it's the last one on behalf of the association at Sheffield. It's coming later on. Consultation, and that was mentioned by Patrick. A letter from 22 amenity societies last year. Some of you might know about it, some of you might not. Went in to Westminster, addressed to the leader. All 22 amenity societies in Westminster expressed a great deal of concern about the state of consultation as it had ended up post-COVID, although also before it wasn't so great. But during the COVID period, we experienced a great lack of it, mainly under what are called ETOs. And these experimental traffic orders meant that the council could come in and decide to do what they wanted without really any formal consultation at all, very little. And that caused a great deal of concern. Following the letter, in fairness to Westminster, it was listened to, responded to, and a committee was set up, on which I sit with other amenity society members, and we have met on one occasion, at least anyway, with officers and other cabinet members of Westminster to try and improve the situation. It does really need improving, because at the moment we're in a situation where most consultations can end up as a mockery. They are there to achieve the end that they're there to achieve the purpose for which they're imposed. And there's very little real listening to everybody, and the responses, they're directed. And the problem with that is that ends up with a lot of people very upset. And I think Westminster recognise that now. So they said they're going to improve consultation. So I have a question, again, and it's my last one, to each member sitting here tonight, each prospective ward member, and that is, what one thing would you do to improve consultations as a presently proposed?
Who wants to start that debate? Patrick, then.
Just to repeat, this is the letter from the Westminster Amenity Society Forum. Every single part of the organisations signed it. But I've worked for a company called a campaign company. I've done consultations in Kensington and Chelsea, in Camden, in Croydon. I've gone and knocked doors on behalf of those councils to listen and find out what their values are and then help bring that back. One of the projects was a climate change convention where none of the usual suspects were invited to take part. They dug deep to find ordinary residents, and they were broke up into like a dozen tables with 10 people on, and they were frequent every month for 3 months. So there are opportunities to have new ways of consulting where residents can be educated a little bit about the topic, and it's not the usual suspects, not the Conservative Party members rocking up and doing their bit, not the Labour Party members doing it, but actual, real, ordinary people. Because the people who join political parties are very much a minority. Most people aren't in them, and most people don't engage. So that's what the Westminster Labour group, if successful, will initiate conventions like that to help bypass some of this lethargy and actually properly listen, not have a tin ear.
Michael wants everybody to say something about this. Julie, are you going to go next?
So yes, I understand Michael's question, how to improve consultation, because as a resident, I have seen and I've heard obviously in the past of different things that are happening and not many residents know about, and then it ends up happening before people actually have a chance to say. However, if Tim, Owen and I are elected next Thursday, I can guarantee you that we will make damn sure that we will improve the consultation process. And I know for me, personally, listening to residents is what I do best, and I will listen, and the Westminster City Council will hear what I have to say. Thank you.
In my last answer, I alluded to the fact that consultation needs to be baked in from the beginning. So one idea is to co-design the consultation process with the amenity societies or the local neighbourhood forums. as a way of really getting to the heart of the issues we're trying to deal with.
Well, we're fortunate to have such good amenity societies who do raise awareness of various issues. And I mean, I'm personally grateful for that, as somebody who lives on the boundary of two of them. And I think actually Westminster does more consultation than technically it has to. For instance, on planning applications, all the local residents all the local residents get a letter, which is actually not a statutory requirement. Only public notices are. But unfortunately, I think because of the history of things, the residents haven't trusted the system, and people don't respond. So, for instance, on the Spiegel tent I mentioned, only 2 residents responded. Only one was very local. Nobody objected about the noise. And I think what we need to do is find a way of re-energising not just the community society, who are very good, but the actual residents to feel they trust the process and to write in and say what they think, because the council does recognise this is an issue, is beginning to change things. We've introduced public speaking at planning meetings, live streaming of planning meetings, and so on and so forth. There are, the council is trying to respond to do this, but it does require, both sides to come together. And it's a question of how to get that trust that residents feel they can actually make a difference. Because certainly as somebody opposing the Spiegel tent at the planning meeting, I would have liked to have had more ammunition than I had, in terms of responses. It's not quite a single answer, but I think it's that point of getting the residents to trust.
Yeah, great, thank you very much. I think citizens' assemblies have worked incredibly well in certain parts of London, and Camden is a role model for conducting citizens' assemblies, particularly on issues around making sure that our councils operate in an environmentally friendly way. So I think that is a route through alongside the points that have been made by my colleagues. In terms of the record here, though, I'm afraid it's not great. And the Amenity Society letter that Patrick's already alluded to highlights exactly why. On the famous Marble Arch Mound, the Amenity Societies pressed home the fact that they were never consulted about the mound. How you arrive at a cost of £6 million without any resident ever having said, we quite like a bunch of scaffolding on our doorstep, is beyond me. But the second point I'll make is that when it came to the Oxford Street Piazza project, we also saw that though the Amenity Society said they were briefly consulted, actually they weren't really engaged properly by the council on that well-publicised event, which was sent to the media without proper consultation with the Amenity Society. So the record isn't great. It's right that I mention that. I know it frustrates people sometimes, but we've got to hold the council to account where they're failing. It's right that they're scrutinised, and the suggestions that I and my colleagues have made, we would want to see implemented after the 5th of May if we're in overall control of the council.
A couple of parts to this. The first direct question as to what would we do to try and enhance consultations. I think actually there is reasonable agreement here, and I think it would extend beyond the people in this room. More co-development, more of the co-creation exercises, which are fundamental to many of the ways in which people are engaging local populations more. And I would emphasise what my colleague Owen said a second ago, that that's really directly with residents, and we need to find ways. It was a surprise to us, for example, when we introduced the additional speaking rights for residents and amenity societies at planning meetings, that those have not been taken up more. And they weren't taken up further, particularly when we did them virtually and online during the lockdown period as well. So there are things that we need to do to understand why that is and to enhance those opportunities. And so in a general sense, that's the direction of travel. A couple of specifics, however. One of them is you referred to ETOs, the experimental traffic orders, which were used quite extensively during the COVID and the lockdown period. In my view, I do believe they are extraordinary in name and they should be used in extraordinary circumstances. And I don't believe that we should have large-scale projects outside of what was a global emergency we shouldn't be using ETOs for that. Sometimes they are necessary for genuine things to do with civil disturbances or whatever else. But the idea that they are used for large-scale public temporary infrastructure projects is one that I wouldn't support, and certainly not without consultation.
Now we're moving on to climate, energy and heritage, demolition and refurbishment. This is Tim Lord of the Soho Society.
Can I just very ask you an easy question with your yes/no cards? 20th century houses, 1937 building in Soho Square, 2018 was an application to demolish it. Should it be demolished?
I can't answer that with a yes/no based on the 2018 application because there's a subsequent one that's been prepared. And that's meaningful to the answer I'm giving. Yeah, you can ask us individually. I can give a verbal answer.
But can I say, as a member of the planning committee, I can't give a joke because I have to be independent. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. You have this.
But I've given an idea of how I vote on planning.
I agree with you. It's fine. It's fine. I think more crucially, M&S did get approval for demolition under the council's current planning policy. Do you individually think, yes or no, that Westminster City Council's planning policy should change the rules so that refurbishment is prioritised over demolition in order to protect the environment?
So refurbishment already is under the revised city plan. So there was a justification given for the difference between the refurbishment and the... Yes, of course I can. Sorry, I was merely saying that the question was based on a premise that's factually not true. There already is a predetermination under the new city plan. So every new development, since whenever it was we implemented that October, has a grid that is completed that basically says this is the carbon footprint under current use, this is what it would be if it was refurbished, this is what it would be if it was demolished, and that is a binding part of the consideration. And we are the only council in the country that has implemented something that looks like that and has taken national planning legislation as far. Can I just answer the previous question though, because there are... That's important. Personally, I would not have supported the M&S demolition, actually predominantly on heritage grounds, and certainly not the bit that's there. I think that the priority for environmental concerns over buildings, I would agree with, although there's some argument about the specifics. 20th Century House is a very good example of that. And since 2018, it has been, you could go, and Tim has been very consistent in saying he's opposed, and the society has opposed, the applications along the way. But we've tried to pursue a policy of engagement with the developer. And I say we in this context being myself and Councillor Glans. I'm not trying to necessarily suggest there was anything else along this. And the original proposal was to demolish all of 20th Century House and everything you see and everything else that was there, which would have taken a huge chunk of carbon to achieve, and would also have removed all of its heritage and asset value. Councillor Glans and I spent time working with the developer and trying to understand what it was they were looking to achieve. And one of the first things that we got out of a positive conversation with them was to say, actually, we'll retain the facade and some of the historic elements of that in order, including the portico, in order that it would have that same visage onto the square. There was a further conversation that took place in which we pointed out the environmental damage that was being done and the fact that we weren't comfortable with that. And as a result, they've taken out one of the additional basement layers that they were planning to excavate, which is actually the most carbon damaging part of the proposal. The fundamental belief that they have is that nobody wants to pay what's needed, and they're a pension company, they need a return. And one of the things that Tim and I discussed in a coffee in my place, however many, 3.5 years ago now, was that if we could find another tenant for it, that argument would disappear. But so far, no other tenant has come forward. So rather than being faced with an unused block on the corner of Soho Square, we've retained the frontage, we've lessened the carbon impact. And for me, there are two other things. There is an individual business that is located next to it that will be, and it is absolutely, it's not just put at risk, we put out of business if a further accommodation isn't found for that business, because it's a sound studio. And I will remain wholly opposed to the demolition of 20th Century House until that business has a satisfactory outcome. And the final part of it, in further recognition of the heritage value, is to get a plaque, one of the Westminster green plaques, installed on the side of the building to recognise what was there. And I have agreed that with the developers, and I'm hoping that that will be up in the summer. So we can recognise the history of 20th century house, we can minimise the environmental impact, and we can actually do something that's been missing, right? We have had, and I apologise, Paul, for some of the things I said earlier, but I was irritated by my bad behaviour. One of the things that's happened in political discourse, and I will honestly say I think this has got worse in the 4 years that I've been doing this, and actually for the preceding 15. Do you mind anybody putting a hand up if you think you're old enough to remember the news in the 1980s? Okay. So the nicest way, you're massively disproportionate of Soho and West End residents whose average age is in their 20s. But anyway, the point is, there used to be this thing that happened, and it's the only point. I'm
trying to understand what the point is.
It is the only point. It is the only point, because it is important. No, you can do that. You can do that. I'm fine. The point is that in the 1980s, you know, you'd wake up and you'd see the news, and it didn't matter which political party, it might have been Margaret Thatcher, or it might have been Mikhail Gorbachev, or it might have been Reagan, it might have been anybody, who would come out staggering, sometimes trade union leaders or Skaga, and they'd come out staggering with massive bags under their eyes at 3 o'clock in the morning. And they'd talk about how they had listened to the other side and they disagreed, but they compromised. Compromised. Now we live in a world where we've got these extreme positions of black and white and yes and no, where there isn't compromise, where somebody says, do you know what, we need to work on redeveloping this building, or we need to do something else, and you don't immediately go, no, you go, let 10 seconds.
Tim, I think I've got to stop you, because I really can't understand the thread.
Well, let me wrap it up for you.
If the Labour and Conservatives want to compromise, fantastic.
It's not Labour and Conservatives. It's different groups.
Everybody can compromise.
Yes, and that's what I'm advocating.
I know. Well, I think I've just said it for you. Every group can compromise. Can we move on and just see if the Labour candidate...
Okay, that would have given me 10 seconds. I could have finished that.
I'll give you 10 seconds because we've got to...
And the point simply being that we have tried to engage in a way that represents compromise so that we can advance this agenda. And we've lessened the carbon impact. We've found a way to restore the heritage. And if, and only if, we can find a way to protect those businesses, will I support that. Otherwise, I remain opposed to the demolition of 20th century house.
I really feel that we've got to move on.
That's fine.
Does anybody from the Labour Party want to say anything about this, the Labour candidate?
Just briefly.
Patrick, briefly, because we are running, can I just say, we started at 6:15. We've had a very, very long session because I know that some of the amenity groups, some of the association wanted every person on this panel to answer questions, and they're entitled to do that. That's the whole point. But we do have to move on. I've got questions to ask, and we've got questions from the floor. It's very important we do that.
10
Patrick,
seconds.
very quickly, please.
The carbon discharge from the refurbishment, or whatever the name is for what they're going to do to 20th Century House, is huge. It's huge. So, sadly, I feel that the Conservatives need to actually conserve the best bits of this area, and I don't think they're guarding them or protect them as much as they could. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Could I say one thing in terms of the presumption, which is the question? There should be a presumption against demolition or a gutting. The presumption, as I understand it, and I'm happy to engage with all of you after the meeting, but the presumption, as I understand it, was taken out of the local plan in April 2021. We can discuss this. What you just mentioned then, Tim, was a balancing decision, looking at the carbon emissions that arose from demolition as opposed to a presumption. But I am willing to be corrected on this.
Yeah, because that's what I was explaining was our conversation, not a planning decision.
So you support a presumption in favour or against demolition and in favour of
as there is, we support the policy as is, which does that.
And where will we find that presumption in the current
in the city
plans? In the city plan, your assertion is that there is a presumption against demolition and in favour of...
In the fact that it's taken into consideration, yes.
Well, no, that's not the same thing.
I really think we can't go into the minutiae of this because this is a hustings and there's lots of people who want to ask
Understood.
questions.
Understood.
Can we just go on to waste and toilets? That's Jason Fisher-Jones. No, we're not doing that.
All it is, it's really simple. We now have temporary toilets in Soho every weekend. It is an intervention which has stopped or reduced the amount of urination on the street. The only question is, this is the global city, this is the centre of our global city, in which people who live here are really proud. Do the candidates think that permanent in the sense that they are every weekend, temporary festival-style toilets is the right answer for Soho.
One person, please, very quickly.
Very, very briefly, our plan is to fund extra toilets through a nighttime levy. Most of the street fouling is caused by people who are drunk on their way home. So if we have a late night levy, we'll have £1 million to have a better clean-up and more toilets, more police, more street pastors, so that vulnerable people get home. They have this in Tower Hamlets, they have it in Camden. We need it in Westminster. Now, temporary until we can have permanent. We need the toilets now. Bridal Lane, so many places. You wander around and the aroma is very, very unpleasant. Telephone boxes, anywhere they can go, they go. So we need a lot more temporary ones, I'm afraid, until there really will be better. Several toilets. The contract for toilets in Westminster was given to a gentleman, I think, called Lord Ashcroft, who was the Conservative Party chairman. And anyone who's been to the toilets will know that they are appallingly managed. And that's just an indication of the way things go sometimes.
Does anybody from the
very quick.
respective candidates?
Yep.
Very quickly.
So that's Carlisle Group. They no longer have the contract. It was removed.
No longer.
It was removed on the basis of underperformance. Do I think there should be temporary toilets? So there's roughly, I think there's 12 sites for temporary toilets at the moment, which was roughly a doubling from pre-lockdown, which came as a result of me requesting it precisely because there was additional urination, which is, I agree, an unsatisfactory long-term solution, but was deliberately done to try and tackle what was there. Do I believe that there should be more toilets? Yes, but it's not a question of funding. To be fair to Patrick, £1 million wouldn't go terribly far for most of those units. Even the temporary, even the APCs, as you call them, as you see those ones that are wheelchair accessible, are £350,000 a time. We already have 4 in the West End, so £1 million wouldn't take you terribly far. The problem is actually where do you build them? And unless we have some demolish some buildings in order to have Section 106 to tell new developers
I know Lucy had a question. There's a man at the back. This woman here has asked me just to quickly ask the Liberal candidate here, the Liberal Democrats, just to give us your headlines, if you can, on what you've heard. We've had a lot of questions. Just give us your headlines, please, as succinctly as possible.
Right, so just picking up the main topics. On alfresco and noise and vision for Soho, it's very much you have to consult the residents. The sort of kind of the pavement widening and the increase in alfresco it can only happen if the residents support that. Sorry.
Come back here. You'll be fine.
Yeah, that's fine. Licensing. I don't think we can have a situation where the only way we can sort of revive the business in Soho and the West End is by having ever more drinking establishments. I think we are at the ceiling on that, and so I think that enforcing that limit makes a lot of sense. Privatisation of public space. I think there is a general sort of sense that, and this is beyond West End. I think that so essentially, big business have a disproportionate say in outcomes, and I think that sweeps over into the whole sort of consultation question, where I think one reason people don't respond to consultations is they don't think they're going to be listened to, because they think there's been a pre-discussion and the answer has been decided, and the job of a consultation is get you to agree to it. Climate change and the demolition and refurbishment, I think that you have to have that presumption of refurbishment. We don't talk enough about climate change, partly because of what's happened with COVID and so on. It is a train wreck happening, and we're going to have to do something about it. There was a question about waste, which I don't think got really picked up that much. It's a massive issue clearly here in Soho, but actually if you go to Fitzrovia, you've got similar. Well, it's not the same issue, but there is a real problem of waste on the streets, and that actually carries over into kind of Marylebone. And and as I wander around the centre of London, the centre of Westminster, it's actually quite a widespread issue. I don't think it's even just Marylebone and West End Ward. I think listening to people, you have to go back to basics. We've got to get back to actually genuinely listening to people. People are really turned off politics. They think we're in it for ourselves, that we don't listen to what people say. We're not going to respond to what people say. And I think we've got a real disconnect, and we'll pay very heavily if we don't actually go back to genuinely listening to people. And I think also we do need to try and work together. There are a lot of things we do actually agree on, and you might not have realised that in the conversation this evening. I do think there are things we do agree on, and we actually need to find and actually seek out those things we agree on and work together to implement them, rather than just finding the things that we disagree on as a sort of kind of push button, kind of divide. So that's a very quick spiel. I think I've taken up enough of your questions.
Lucy first, and the gentleman at the back, then the woman here, and then I'll ask people at the woman there, Andrew Murray, and you. The woman here. Thank you very much. Well, put your hand up, and then I'll ask you to ask the question. But I didn't see. Do you want to ask a question? You can go after the woman here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. As chair of the Plan for Soho, I would just like to take exception to the point made by Tim that more people took part in the consultations of Vision for Soho than took part in Plan for Soho. Over the course of 7 years, multiple consultations in the streets, and having been involved in most of those consultations, I take complete exception to that. There was 3,000 people that took part in many of the consultations. But my question is, are the candidates prepared to scrap Vision for Soho and start again post the election, bearing in mind the massive opposition to it?
The Labour candidates already have.
Do you want to just roll the questions up just for speed, and we'll do all of them?
Well, do all of them.
Okay. Lucy, if it's
we need answers. Forgive me.
I was trying to answer
I think we need answers to each individual question, because there are a number of people who want to ask questions. So we'll answer this one first. Labour's already put their signs up.
Go on. If there's a consultation, it's rejected, we scrap it. Yes.
And our residents are separate.
And residents can be asked separately. Yes.
And if 50% of the residents say no, it doesn't happen.
If there is not a majority, it doesn't happen.
Is that 50% of people who vote, or 50% of residents?
Oh, 50% of respondents.
Residents.
We're not. I did say. I said respondents. I can't. We can't. I am answering.
It's respondents.
That was a factual answer.
At the back.
You made that clear earlier as well.
I've been a resident in West End Ward for more than 50 years. The reason I think, as some people have said, that there's been insufficient response to consultation requests to individual residents is that residents have to pay for postage. Apart from applications in respect of individual buildings close to where I live, I have never as an individual been consulted, and not everyone is on email. I am not. I'm sure the Residents' Association respond fully. That's fine. But individual residents do wish to be consulted. If the return postage could be paid for, I think you would get a much better response. For the last 50 years, I would say that apart from one relatively recent response, I've never had a reply from a local councillor to my letter.
Thank you. I think the what you said.
Great idea. West End Labour have a landline, and so many people who are vulnerable or perhaps sometimes elderly can't access smartphone apps. So if you're a Peabody resident, you have an emergency and you don't have a smartphone, you have to press 1 for emergency, and you don't get any help unless you can use the smartphone. So we have to go out and find more normal ways that people who don't regularly have high technology to get engaged. That's it. Simple, great idea.
Thank you. Woman there.
Yeah, I live in the area which has been transferred from the Marylebone ward, and we've always felt neglected, and quite honestly, I'm feeling neglected here tonight as well. I live in a little street called Greenwell Street, and because of the problem, because of Camden's, whether it's the Mayor of London, changes in the streets in Tottenham Court Road and Gower Street, we now have on our little street, it's become like a fast track for cars. We've got a hospital there, we've got children there, we've got people in wheelchairs. But one of our problems is, and as big trucks come along, is that we're right on the border, and half of Cleveland Street is outside Westminster and half of it is Camden. And what do we do when the problems are from Camden? I think some of the restaurants on that side dump their rubbish on our side. Also, the noise is from their restaurants and the way they're parking their heavy lorries that come round. What do we do when we're in Westminster and the problems, a lot of it is because of what's happening in Camden on the other side?
What can the local authorities do to assist one another, or can't you do that, or do you have something in place already? And if not, are you going to? Because that's the problem.
Yeah, sure.
That's the problem, obviously, on the border.
Thank you for raising that issue with us, and that's part of the reason that we're against the pedestrianisation of other bits of Westminster, because of the displacement of traffic, the noise, the pollution. We know the Labour candidates on the other side of the Fitzrovia border very well. We know the Labour Council there very well, and we certainly would endeavour to discuss these issues with them and try to find joint solutions. And I know it's been a frustration for Fitzrovia residents that they haven't been able to have a joint amenities society with the Camden and the Westminster side. So we'll have to really put that high on our list of priorities to make sure that people on the border, the issues that are cross-border, we're helping to deal with them.
The problem is if you become, the council tax on one side is so much higher than the one I'm paying on the Westminster side.
But I don't think that will make a difference to what we can do and the communication that we can have with the councillors on that side.
Yes.
So it was great to see you coming in here tonight, because I know that where you live has not been looked after and you feel like you've been left behind. And actually the street that you live on looks like it's been left behind and it doesn't belong in that area. And I completely understand what you're saying, because even on Cleveland Street we had a big laundrette that all the residents used, but the Labour borough got rid of that laundrette without any consultation with the residents, and now they have nowhere to wash their clothes. There's also Howard House, where we have some people with mental health issues and some drug problems, and this is something that I definitely want to look at if I'm elected. With my background in nursing, I've worked with mental health issues, I've worked with drug dealers, or drug dealing issues, not drug dealers. I hope not.
She said she worked with them, she wasn't a customer. We're just making that clear.
But this is something, I want to make that particular area a better place to live in. I've spoken to all of the traffic problem as well, and the streets are so narrow. And like you said, a lot of families live in that area. So it's something that is definitely on my radar, and I can guarantee you, if we're voted in, if the Conservatives will be voted in next week, we will do something about it.
And just to be clear, Councillor Adam Harrison, who is one of the Labour councillors outside, has reached out to me over the rubbish issue recently, and we have got the two councils talking as a result.
Thank you very much for that. Andrew? You had a question from this woman, that woman and that man.
Okay, I've got a slight change of tone because all my questions have gone already.
Well, sit down.
No, this is an important question. It's more about politics in general. Politicians aren't generally held in very high regard, and actually I think that's a little bit unfair. Most of us probably don't appreciate the work that goes into politics at every level. So I think actually, whatever you think about their policies, we should be grateful to the candidates who are here.
Yay!
But only of us want to know about values and character. As well as hard work, voters want straight answers to straight questions, a willingness to be self-critical, and a certain independence, a commitment to put conscience and public interest above party loyalty when necessary. So, focusing on your own party and not on your opponents, to Conservative candidates, if you're Boris Johnson, would you have resigned? If not, why not? To Labour candidates, what is your biggest disagreement with Sadiq Khan? Don't include Oxford Street, we've had that one. And or Keir Starmer. And to the Liberal Democrats, why hasn't your party been actively involved in West End issues before asking for our votes?
I'm going.
Regent Street and Hyde Park, Park Lane, Euston Road, although they're not West End ward roads, except Regent Street is, those narrowings are a real problem to me. I cycle down Park Lane sometimes. There's a perfectly valuable cycle lane in Hyde Park. We didn't need to lose a whole lane to it on Park Lane. It's an absolute nightmare. And the same is true of Euston Road. He's wrong. Fair enough. Keir Starmer, I agree with him 99% of the time. He's a very good leader.
Anybody from the...
So, sorry, I've got each candidate, please.
No, we've
It's a personal vote.
No, I'm sorry.
Andrew.
We haven't got the time. We've got...
One second. We vote for individual candidates. We're not voting for party slates. So I think it's quite important that each candidate says something.
All right, we'll finish at 8:30. No, sorry, Tim, do you want to go now? And we'll do it in order.
Yes, Andrew, thank you. Very apt on a day in which, yes, Boris Johnson has been reprimanded and the investigation into Keir Starmer has been reopened for his character. Yes, it happened yesterday. Okay, you can do that if you like. But in either sense, if it had happened to me, I don't believe I would have been there. I didn't go out and party. I didn't go out and do those. I stayed in Soho throughout and often bumped into you in the street when we were going out for walks. Yes, I would have resigned if any of those issues had happened to me, unequivocally. And I believe I speak for all of us if we need to do it. Okay.
We'll have Jessica next, and then Julie.
My biggest disagreement with Sadiq Khan was over the changes to the congestion charge that came in that affected residents. I know a lot of residents who need cars for their families, work, etc. The churches also complained that parishioners couldn't get in. I know it's changed slightly, but it hasn't changed enough. Keir Starmer, I think, is a man of great integrity. I don't think he's held the government to account enough on COVID and the Partygate scandal.
So I agree with Tim. I think he should have stood down. I am a nurse. I've worked all the way through the lockdown as a COVID vaccinator, and I did that, and then I went home and I didn't see anybody else, and I abided by the rules, abided by the lockdowns, so therefore that's my feeling.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's a really good question. It makes life tricky for us a little bit, but I think it's absolutely right that all of us are held to these commitments and the comments that we make about our parties. On Sadiq Khan, I had concerns, big concerns, about the Marks and Spencer's decision, which appears to have been reversed by Gove, of all people. So that was my biggest complaint there. On Keir, his biggest error it was allowing Jeremy Corbyn to stay in the party for as long as he did. And it's absolutely right that he's now no longer a member of the parliamentary party.
I agree completely with Paul on that point. It's nice to have some agreement across the aisle. On Boris, I think this ambush with cake issue, I think is in itself not resignation material, but I think the overall tone that was set in number 10 was clearly inappropriate, and he has to take, although it's partly a civil service, he clearly has to take the flak for it. So I agree completely with Tim that Boris should have resigned.
Thanks. I'm Faye. I wanted to raise...
I was going to just respond to Andrew's question, if I may.
Oh, yes, of course.
So your question was why we not been sort of campaigning with standing candidates. I think we want to give everyone an opportunity across the whole of Westminster to vote Liberal Democrat if they would like to. I think all parties try and stand candidates in every ward. We're trying to build up capacity to campaign everywhere. We're obviously a smaller party, and so it's a bit of a challenge. So we're building, and we definitely want to endeavour to be able to be doing a full-on campaign, not just in 2026, but well before that. So we're working on it.
Thank you. Well, I've got a question, but I just wanted to add to what Suzanne was saying about Greenwell Street, in that it's very heavily commercialised. We have a hotel, we've got an orthopaedic centre with elderly and mobility issues. We have loads of children, and we have a high density of social housing as well. And the decision for the traffic has been a Westminster decision, where they have made surrounding roads calm for traffic, and our road now is a free for all, the trucks and everything that's going through, but there has been a lack of compassion for the residents, and the pollution is farcical because it's selected areas where it's being addressed. That's just our, and on top of that, they've added a controlled cycle lane. Someone is going to get killed, which we now have pedicabs, e-scooters, and antisocial ongoings. That is horrendous, as it's a hot spot for the area. That was just on that question. My question really is, because I'm very involved in the community, and those two lovely ladies have left, and they actually encouraged me to ask it. I'm actually focusing on the elderly in the area as well as the young, okay? Oxford Street, and I understand everybody's got your passions and you are entitled to it. There are a lot of car drivers here and people probably living in a higher income pension or whatever. A lot of the pensioners are pension poverty. A lot of the lower paid income people are living in social housing, rely on public transport. A lot of people commuting can't always use Crossrail, the tubes, and certainly the older people because of the step access. And so bus transport is really important. Stopping routes and having to cross huge carriageways to get to your venue. Oxford Street has had established department stores out of business. That is shameful in today's society. Instead of revelry and more beer things, we're talking about social isolation. We're talking about young mothers with nowhere to go. We're talking about people with mental health, living in areas where there's no support for them, and young and communities have been disbanded because the younger can't afford to live in the areas that they perhaps have grown up. We have wonderful parks that you can't get to, and pollution is at its worst. So on behalf of the older people, the decisions, and not the talking, what are you going to do? In Hammersmith and Fulham, social care, adult social care, it's in the news today. I mean, care homes and the catastrophe that's gone on in the care homes, and COVID has not gone away. I think we need to be very clear on this. COVID has not disappeared, yet our health services in the area and the way funding and contracts have been awarded, and as a nurse you will understand that, there is a two-tier system of a north-south divide, and South Westminster are much less funded than North Westminster. So I love Soho, and Fitzrovia, we need to see more family-orientated places for eateries. We need to make sure there is an energy crisis and a poverty crisis, that people can go out and enjoy an outdoor, but we do not need to add to the alcohol consumption, because alcohol abuse is even higher than drug abuse, and I think people seem to forget that. So please, on behalf of the older people and the younger people, you guys have not been proactive enough on our behalf. I want to see adult social care free at the point of entry, just like they have at Hammersmith and Fulham. It's the only borough, and that elderly people are having the quality and dignity life that they deserve in our country.
I think that's more of a statement than a question.
Yeah, that I'm just not supporting.
No, thank you very much. Now, we've got two more questions. The woman there and then the man there.
Thank you very much, and it's a related but potentially opposite end question. My name's Ella, I live in Marylebone, Westminster Girl through and through. I run a youth charity by Leicester Square, and I'm a school governor up in Maida Vale. So really thrilled to be here with people who care about our community as much as I do, and I think lots of us would agree that one of the ways that we judge a community is how well it takes care of its most vulnerable children. And as a governor, where the school is, we've got a very small catchment area, but we draw in children from Westminster, Brent and Camden. And I've got to say that for our vulnerable children who require social care services, the difference in the quality they get from Westminster City Council with our outstanding children's services versus, frankly, more expensive council tax and Labour-run Camden and Brent is horrendous. The children in Camden and Brent get patchy support, they're tossed from social worker to social worker, and it's a postcode lottery on how the children are looked after. So I'm really proud of our children's social services. How will you, and I'm very happy to just take a party answer from each side, how will you ensure that we, in the next council term, our most vulnerable children are protected here in the West End?
Fantastic work that you're doing. One example of where the Labour Party was on the front foot was the desire to ensure that children from poorer backgrounds got fed during the school holidays. And the saddest thing was that Westminster Council voted against that. And this is a very recent thing. It's the Marcus Rashworth thing. And sadly, Westminster was well behind the curve there. And I think that's a tragedy. The other things that we need to ensure are that there are places for young people to go to do learning, like libraries. It's about time that Marylebone had its permanent library, that Mayfair's wasn't under threat. And with a bit of extra money, we can ensure that they are. And I see you're laughing, but we had the document that said £200,000 will be saved. So someone was doing it. Tim didn't know, but someone did know. All right. Anyway, pardon me. So yes, I think school children should be fed if they're from poorer families during the school holidays. I think we should keep our youth clubs open, like Four Feathers and others. And I think that's possibly got its future a bit dubious under the council, so I'm not sure. Tim might know a bit more about that.
As the comment suggested, I do. So I'm, in addition to being your ward councillor, I'm the cabinet member for young people and learning. So I'm responsible for the £100 million a year we spend on 49 schools, the libraries, social services, and so on. We do indeed have the top-ranked social services for children in the country, according to Ofsted. We have 93% of our schools that are ranked as good or outstanding. We are the preeminent district for taking care of young people in the centre of London. And I can confirm, and actually my opposite number has been lurking at the back in the nicest possible way this evening. I can confirm that free school meals will continue throughout the rest of this academic year, and the support that we give through the grants that have been made available for all of those school activities right the way through the school summer holidays and right the way through the end of this academic year. There is no threat to that. There is no threat to Four Feathers. There has not been at any point in the 2.5 years that I have done this job a single second under which Mayfair Library has been under threat. It is a manufactured issue that these guys used in order to scare you and collect email addresses in a petition. It is a 100% manufactured issue. There has never been a moment at which Mayfair Library is there, and I give you an absolute promise that if it was to close, I would resign.
Okay, thank you.
One final question from this man.
Yeah, don't worry, very short and quick. This is to you, Paul. I was listening to your opening remarks very carefully, and you happened to mention the ex-president, 45th president of the United States had to as a kind of joke, right?
Yeah.
So my question is to you, how can we trust you to be a potential counselor, right? If you're kind of focusing or kind of making a joke about someone who's nothing to do with this campaign, who's also like the 45th president, who's also the former leader of the free world, who may well actually be the future president of the United States, right? That doesn't correlate to this election, right? What we're voting for you is actually what you're going to do to help us, right? So kind of making fun of someone who's not really, well, making a joke, right? It doesn't make sense. Like, who's actually a man who was the president of the United States, who's actually the leader of the free world.
So is that, you're saying that was inappropriate?
No, I mean, I personally think it's, but I want to hear, I'm just asking, how can we trust him to kind of tackle the issues?
How can we trust you to tackle the issues? Because you
I mean, you laugh.
What's your name, sorry?
Ryan.
Ryan. Let's rewind a little bit, because it's been an acrimonious evening at points. I'll acknowledge that. And I think let's just briefly say this. It's absolutely right that we need to keep our tone appropriate. And I will commit at a council level, I will commit to doing the very best that I can to work constructively if we don't take all 3 seats with any Conservative councillor who's in this ward, and to treat them with respect and dignity. I do not have any compunction about criticising Donald Trump.
Thank you. And that question was sum up, but it's been a very long evening, and I think if they sum up, they're just going to reiterate every single thing they've said, and I think that we know that they said, because they've had a tough night. So I want to thank the Marylebone Association, the volunteers from the Soho Society.
Democracy in action.